I still hear her voice in my head sometimes, sharp and cold, standing in my own kitchen, looking at me like I was trash she wanted to throw out, saying, "Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back." That was the moment my entire world cracked open, the moment I realized that losing my husband wasn't the end of my suffering. It was only the beginning. I had just buried the man I loved, the father of my child, the person who promised to protect me forever, and here was his own mother telling me I didn't belong anymore. I remember gripping the edge of the counter so hard my nails hurt, my legs shaking, my chest burning like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to collapse on the floor, but instead I just stood there, silent, swallowing my pain. And before I tell you how this all ended, I need to ask you something. If you were in my place, grieving your husband and being thrown out like you were nothing, would you have walked away quietly, or would you have fought back? Let me take you back to the beginning, because nothing about this story makes sense unless you understand how I ended up in that house, standing across from the woman who would eventually try to erase me from her life. My name is Ayesha, and I married my husband Imran when I was 24. He wasn't rich, he wasn't flashy, but he was kind in a way that felt rare. He listened when I spoke. He noticed the little things, like how I hated coriander in my food, or how I needed absolute silence when I was anxious. We met through family friends, and from the first meeting, I felt safe around him. His mother, however, was another story. From the very start, she made it clear that I wasn't what she had imagined for her son. I wasn't from a big family. My father had passed away years ago, and my mother lived with my younger brother. I worked before marriage. I had opinions, and I didn't know how to keep my head down the way she expected a daughter-in-law to. She smiled at me in front of others, but her eyes were always judging, always measuring me. After marriage, I moved into their house because that's what was expected. Imran promised me things would change, that once we settled in, his mother would soften. I wanted to believe him. For a while, things were manageable. I did my best to please her. I woke up early, cooked, cleaned, tried to follow every rule she set. Still, nothing was ever enough. The food was too spicy or too bland. The house wasn't clean enough, even when I was exhausted. If I laughed too loudly, I was shameless. If I stayed quiet, I was arrogant. Imran tried to stand up for me sometimes, but she always turned it around, crying, saying I was taking her son away from her. Slowly, I learned to stay silent. I told myself this was marriage, this was sacrifice. Then I got pregnant, and for the first time, I felt like maybe my place in that family would finally be secure. When my daughter was born, I thought everything would change. Instead, it somehow got worse. She wanted to control everything, from how I fed my baby to how I held her. She criticized me constantly, saying I was a careless mother, that I didn't know anything. I was already exhausted, emotional, and insecure, and her words cut deeper than I can explain. Imran became my only support. At night, when the house was quiet, I would cry into his shoulder, and he would tell me to be patient, that one day we would move out, that this phase would pass. I held onto those promises like they were lifelines. Then, one ordinary morning, my entire life collapsed. Imran was driving to work when a truck hit his car. They told me it was instant. No pain, no suffering. Just gone. I remember screaming when I got the call. A sound that didn't even feel human. I don't remember the ride to the hospital. Only the coldness of the floor when my legs gave out. The way the world went silent when I saw his body. Everything after that felt like a blur. The funeral, the people, the condolences that sounded empty. I was numb, moving like a ghost. My daughter was too young to understand, but she kept looking for her father, and every time she did, it felt like someone was tearing my heart out all over again. During those first days of grief, I was barely functioning. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. I would sit for hours staring at nothing. That's when my mother-in-law changed completely. Instead of offering comfort, she became distant, cold. She stopped speaking to me, unless it was necessary. I overheard her whispering to relatives about how I was unlucky, how her son died because of me, how ever since I entered their house, nothing good had happened. Those words haunted me at night. I started blaming myself, even though I knew deep down it wasn't true. A few weeks after Imran's death, she called me into the living room. My daughter was sleeping in my arms. The house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. She didn't ask me to sit. She just looked at me and said the words that still echo in my mind. Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. For a second, I thought I misheard her. My ears rang, my heart pounded. I asked her what she meant, my voice barely above a whisper. She said this was her son's house, and now that he was gone, I had no place there. She said she would keep my daughter, that it was better for the child to grow up in her father's home, not with a woman who had nothing. I felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. Losing my husband was unbearable, but the thought of losing my child too. That broke something inside me. I begged her. I'm not proud of it, but I begged. I told her I had nowhere to go, that my mother's house was small, that I needed time to figure things out. I told her I would do anything, follow any rule, just let me stay. She looked at me with pure disgust and said I should be grateful she was even allowing me a few days to pack. That night, I cried harder than I ever had before. I held my daughter close, terrified that she would be taken from me. I felt small, powerless, like my entire identity had been erased the moment my husband died. The next few days were torture. She treated me like a stranger, like a burden she couldn't wait to get rid of. Relatives came and went, and some of them looked at me with pity, others with judgment. No one spoke up for me. No one told her she was wrong. I realized then how alone I truly was. I started packing my things quietly, my hands shaking as I folded clothes that still smelled like Imran. Every item felt like a memory I was being forced to abandon. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with fear. How would I raise my daughter alone? How would I survive without a home, without financial support? Imran had handled everything. I had trusted him completely, and now I was lost. But somewhere in the middle of all that pain, something inside me started to change. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one night, as I watched my daughter sleeping peacefully, her tiny hand curled around my finger, I felt a spark of anger beneath the grief. Not the kind of anger that makes you scream, but the kind that makes you determined. I realized that if I left quietly, if I allowed myself to be erased, my daughter would grow up thinking her mother was weak, disposable. I thought about all the years I had sacrificed, all the silence I had swallowed, and I knew I couldn't let this be the end of my story. I started thinking back on everything Imran had ever told me. He had always said the house was in his name. He had mentioned savings, insurance, things I had never paid attention to because I trusted him. For the first time since his death, I felt a sense of purpose. I wasn't ready to reveal anything yet, but in my heart I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. So that's where I was, standing on the edge of losing everything, with a mother-in-law who wanted me gone, and a future that looked terrifyingly uncertain. So now, I want you to pause for a second and really think about this. If you were me, a woman who lost her husband and was being pushed out of her own life, what would you do next? Would you leave quietly to protect your peace, or would you stand your ground and fight for what you and your child deserve? Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to think about that, because the choice I made changed everything, and the consequences were something no one in that house was prepared for. After that night, after I asked myself whether I was going to disappear quietly or fight for my existence, I barely slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Every sound in the house felt louder, every shadow heavier. I kept replaying my mother-in-law's words over and over, the way she said them so casually, as if she were throwing away an old piece of furniture instead of a human being who had just lost her husband. In the early hours of the morning, when the call to prayer echoed faintly outside, I sat up in bed and realized something important. No one was coming to save me, not relatives, not society, not even the people who once called me family. If I didn't stand up for myself and my daughter now, I never would. That realization was terrifying, but it was also strangely empowering. The next day, I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. I noticed how my mother-in-law suddenly became very interested in locking doors and cupboards, how she started keeping papers in her room instead of the shared cabinet. I noticed how she avoided talking about money altogether. Before Imran's death, household expenses were always discussed openly. Now, if I asked even a simple question, she snapped at me. That behavior planted a seed of suspicion in my heart. I remembered Imran telling me, months before his accident, that he had finally transferred the house into his own name after years of paperwork. He had said it casually, over dinner, smiling proudly, saying it was for our daughter's future. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now that memory burned in my mind, I decided to call my maternal uncle, the only person in my family who had some understanding of legal matters. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, my heart racing with fear that even he might tell me to just leave and accept my fate. When he answered, I couldn't hold it together. I cried as I told him everything, from Imran's death to my mother-in-law's ultimatum. There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought I had lost him too. Then he spoke, his voice firm in a way I hadn't heard in years. He told me not to pack a single bag yet. He told me to find any documents Imran had left behind, anything with his name on it. He said, very clearly, that no one could throw me out without a fight if the law was on my side. That conversation gave me just enough courage to take my first real step. That afternoon, while my mother-in-law was visiting a relative, I searched our room carefully. I felt guilty, like I was doing something wrong, but desperation has a way of quieting guilt. In a drawer beneath Imran's clothes, I found a folder I had never opened before. Inside were copies of bank statements, insurance papers, and most importantly, the house documents. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped them. The house was indeed in Imran's name. Not only that, but there was also a life insurance policy listing me as the primary beneficiary, with a significant amount that I had no idea existed. I sat on the bed, clutching those papers, crying silently. For the first time since his death, I felt like Imran was still protecting me, even from beyond the grave. But with that relief came fear. I knew that if my mother-in-law found out I had seen these documents, she would do everything in her power to destroy them or twist the truth. So I hid them carefully, wrapping them in my daughter's old blanket and placing them at the bottom of my suitcase, beneath clothes she would never touch. That night, when my mother-in-law returned, she was in a foul mood. She complained about relatives who had no manners, and hinted again that I should hurry up and leave. I stayed quiet, my heart pounding, my face carefully blank. Inside, a storm was brewing, but I wasn't ready to unleash it yet. Over the next few days, the tension in the house became unbearable. She started making cruel comments in front of others, implying that I was waiting to steal her son's property. The irony of that accusation almost made me laugh, but I bit my tongue. I realized she was already planning her narrative, painting me as the villain before I even spoke up. That's when I decided I needed help beyond my family. I contacted a local lawyer recommended by my uncle. Walking into that office felt surreal. I was still wearing white, still visibly grieving, but I was there to talk about rights, documents, and survival. The lawyer listened patiently as I told my story. When I showed him the papers, his expression changed immediately. He explained that as Imran's legal wife and the mother of his child, I had strong rights, not only to the insurance money, but also to live in the house. He said my mother-in-law had no legal authority to evict me, and she absolutely could not take my daughter away from me without my consent. Hearing those words felt like oxygen after weeks of suffocation. I wasn't powerless. I had been made to feel that way, but the truth was very different. Still, knowing my rights and enforcing them were two very different things. The lawyer warned me that standing up would mean conflict, possibly public drama, maybe even court. I went home that day feeling heavier than before. Was I ready for that? I thought about my daughter, about the kind of example I wanted to set for her. Did I want her to see her mother run away, or stand firm even when it was hard? That night, as I fed her dinner and watched her smile at me, the answer became clear. I would fight, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, my mother-in-law called a family meeting. Relatives filled the living room, their faces serious, their eyes full of curiosity. I knew what this was. She wanted witnesses. She wanted to humiliate me, to pressure me into leaving quietly. When everyone was seated, she began speaking, her voice dripping with false sadness. She talked about her loss, about how hard it was to live in a house full of memories. Then she turned to me and said, in front of everyone, that it was time for me to leave, that it was best for all of us. She even suggested that my daughter stay with her, claiming it would be better for her upbringing. My heart raced, but I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my voice was steady, surprising even me. I told them all that I was grieving too, that this was my home as much as it was hers, and that I had no intention of leaving my daughter behind. The room erupted into murmurs. My mother-in-law's face hardened. She accused me of being greedy, of planning this all along. That's when I said the words that changed the atmosphere completely. I told them the house was in Imran's name. I said it calmly, without anger, just stating a fact. The room went silent. She denied it immediately, her voice rising, but I could see panic flicker in her eyes. That night was chaos. Arguments broke out, relatives took sides, and for the first time my mother-in-law lost control of the narrative. Some people advised compromise. Others told me to leave for the sake of peace. But peace at the cost of my dignity was no longer an option for me. When everyone left, she confronted me privately, her mask completely gone. She accused me of betraying her, of turning her own family against her. She threatened me, saying she would make my life hell if I didn't leave. I listened quietly, my heart pounding, but I didn't back down. I told her I knew my rights and that I was prepared to protect myself and my daughter. From that day on, the house became a battlefield. She stopped providing food, locked the kitchen cupboards, and tried to make my daily life as difficult as possible. It was petty, cruel, and exhausting, but every act of hostility only strengthened my resolve. I started documenting everything, taking notes, saving messages, preparing myself for whatever came next. I knew she wouldn't give up easily, and I was right. One afternoon, I returned from visiting my mother to find my suitcase missing. Panic surged through me as I searched the room. When I confronted her, she claimed she had thrown it out, saying I had no need for it since I was leaving anyway. My heart nearly stopped. That suitcase held the documents that were my lifeline. I ran outside, searching through trash and storage areas, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. I finally found it hidden in a shed, untouched. I collapsed on the ground, clutching it, realizing just how far she was willing to go. That was the moment I understood something crucial. This was no longer just about property or money. It was about control. She couldn't stand the idea that I still had a place, that I wasn't completely dependent on her mercy, and she was willing to destroy me to regain that control. Standing there in the dirt, holding that suitcase, I promised myself I would not let her win. Not for my sake alone, but for my daughter's future. So that's where things stood at that point. The tension had exploded into open war. The truth was beginning to surface, and I was standing at the edge of a decision that would either break me or redefine me completely. And before I tell you what I did next, before I reveal how I finally turned the tables, I want you to really think about this situation. If you were in my place, surrounded by hostility, threatened in your own home, would you keep pushing forward, knowing it could get even uglier, or would you walk away just to escape the pain? Because the choice I made next didn't just change my life. It shattered the illusion my mother-in-law had built for years, and nothing was ever the same after that. By the time I reached the point where I had to make my next move, my nerves were constantly on edge. Every morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach, not knowing what kind of cruelty or manipulation I would face that day. The house that once felt like my marital home now felt like enemy territory. I moved quietly, spoke carefully, and kept my emotions locked deep inside, because I knew any visible weakness would be used against me. My mother-in-law watched me closely, her eyes always sharp, as if she were waiting for me to slip. And in a way, she was right to watch me, because I was no longer the silent, obedient woman she thought she could crush. I was planning something she never expected. I began strengthening my support system in small, careful ways. I stayed in regular contact with my uncle and the lawyer, updating them on every incident, every threat, every act of harassment. I started visiting my mother more often, not just for emotional comfort, but so there would be witnesses to how I was being treated. Slowly, I stopped hiding my fear and replaced it with quiet confidence. That change didn't go unnoticed. My mother-in-law began accusing me of acting too smart, of plotting behind her back. She wasn't wrong, but hearing her say it only confirmed that I was finally reclaiming some power. One evening, she crossed a line that I can never forget. I had stepped out to buy groceries, leaving my daughter with her for less than an hour. When I returned, my daughter was crying uncontrollably, her little face red and swollen. My mother-in-law claimed she had just woken up from a bad nap, but something felt wrong. Later that night, as I changed her clothes, I noticed faint red marks on her arm, like someone had grabbed her too tightly. My heart stopped. Rage flooded my entire body, so intense I felt dizzy. I confronted my mother-in-law immediately, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. She denied everything, of course, and then twisted it, accusing me of being an unfit mother who imagined things because I was mentally unstable after my husband's death. That accusation terrified me more than her threats. I realized she wasn't just trying to push me out anymore. She was trying to build a case against me, to paint me as emotionally unfit, so she could take my child. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat beside my daughter's bed, watching her breathe, my mind racing. By morning, I had made a decision that felt like crossing a point of no return. I called my lawyer and told him everything. His response was immediate and serious. He told me to prioritize my safety and my child's safety above all else. He suggested we prepare a formal legal notice, asserting my rights and documenting the harassment. A few days later, the notice was sent. When my mother-in-law received it, her reaction was explosive. She screamed, cried, accused me of betrayal, and then suddenly shifted into playing the victim. She told relatives that I was trying to throw her out of her own house, that I was an ungrateful woman who had bewitched her son and now wanted to steal everything. Phones started ringing nonstop. Some people scolded me, telling me I was being disrespectful. Others quietly admitted that what was happening to me was wrong, but said they didn't want to get involved. It was isolating, exhausting, and heartbreaking. But I didn't back down. As the days passed, the environment became even more hostile. She would mutter insults under her breath, slam doors, and deliberately create scenes in front of neighbors. Once, she even locked me out of the house for hours, claiming she didn't hear me knocking. I stood outside with my daughter, humiliated and furious, while neighbors watched from their windows. That night, when I finally got inside, I broke down completely. I cried harder than I ever had before, not just for myself, but for the life I thought I was building when I married into that family. Everything felt like a lie now, and yet, in the middle of all that chaos, something unexpected happened. The insurance company contacted me directly. Apparently, my mother-in-law had tried to inquire about the claim, only to be told that she had no authority to do so. They reached out to me to begin the process. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. That money represented security, freedom, and options. It was also something my mother-in-law clearly believed she was entitled to. I knew that once she realized she had no control over it, her behavior would escalate even further. Sure enough, when she found out, her cruelty reached new heights. She accused me of hiding money, of planning to abandon the family once I got what I wanted. She even suggested, openly, that I should hand over the insurance money to her, since it was her son's earnings. The audacity of that demand left me speechless. I told her calmly that the policy was legally mine and meant for my daughter's future. That was the first time I truly saw hatred in her eyes. Pure, unfiltered hatred. That night, she tried a different tactic. She sat down across from me and suddenly started crying, talking about how lonely she was, how she had lost her son, how afraid she was of being abandoned. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost, but then she said it. She said if I truly cared about her, I would leave my daughter with her and go back to my mother's house until I got myself together. She framed it as concern, as love, but I could hear the manipulation in every word. I stood up, my voice steady, and told her that my daughter would stay with me, no matter what. Her tears stopped instantly. The mask slipped. She called me selfish and heartless, and I walked away knowing there was no reconciliation possible anymore. Around this time, relatives started pressuring me to compromise. They said things like, "She's old, be patient," and "think about family honor." Every time I heard those words, I felt a bitter laugh rise in my chest. Where was that concern for honor when I was being threatened and humiliated? Where was that patience when my child was being used as a weapon? I realized then how often women are expected to absorb pain quietly in the name of peace. And I refused to be that woman anymore. Then came the incident that forced my hand completely. One afternoon, I returned home to find my room ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, clothes thrown everywhere. My heart dropped as I ran to check my suitcase. The documents were gone. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Panic, rage, and despair all crashed into me at once. When I confronted her, she smirked and said she had no idea what I was talking about. That look on her face told me everything. She thought she had finally won. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of her. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer right there in front of her. I told him my documents had been stolen and that I feared for my and my child's safety. His voice was calm but urgent. He told me to leave the house immediately and come stay with my mother while he took legal action. Walking out of that house with my daughter in my arms was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt like failure and victory all at once. So that's the situation I was in at that point. I had left the house. My relationship with my mother-in-law was completely shattered, and the battle had officially moved into the legal and public arena. Before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal how this conflict finally reached its breaking point, I want you to pause for a moment. Put yourself in my shoes. Would you have left the house to protect your child, even if it meant giving up the place you fought so hard to claim? Or would you have stayed, and risked everything just to prove a point. Think about that, because the choice I made next shocked everyone involved and changed the balance of power in a way no one saw coming. Leaving that house felt like ripping a piece of my soul out, but once I was at my mother's place, holding my daughter while she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I knew I had made the right decision. Still, the relief didn't last long. The moment my mother-in-law realized I wasn't coming back quietly, her strategy shifted completely. What she couldn't control with fear inside the house, she now tried to control through lies, pressure, and public humiliation. Within days, relatives started calling nonstop. Some pretended to care, asking if I was okay, while subtly suggesting that I had overreacted. Others were more direct, accusing me of abandoning a grieving mother and trying to steal property that didn't belong to me. Each call felt like another attempt to drag me back into the cage I had just escaped. At the same time, my lawyer moved quickly. He filed a formal complaint documenting the harassment, the threats, the attempted eviction, and most importantly, the disappearance of my legal documents. I was terrified of the legal process, of courts and paperwork, and the possibility that somehow, despite everything, I might still lose. But every time fear crept in, I looked at my daughter and reminded myself that this fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about ensuring she grew up knowing her mother didn't give up when things got ugly. The first official notice from the court hit my mother-in-law like a bomb. She showed up at my mother's house unannounced, her face red with rage, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She accused me of dragging family matters into the courts, of ruining her reputation, of trying to destroy her in her old age. I stood there, shaking but silent, while she unleashed years of resentment. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I told her calmly that she had left me no choice, that I had begged her for time, for dignity, and she had responded with cruelty. That was the moment she realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. What followed were weeks of intense stress. Court dates were scheduled, postponed, rescheduled. Each visit felt like stepping into another world, one where my personal pain was reduced to files and arguments. My mother-in-law hired her own lawyer, someone aggressive who tried to paint me as manipulative and greedy. They claimed I was emotionally unstable after my husband's death, and that my daughter would be better off with her grandmother. Hearing those words spoken so casually in a courtroom made my blood boil. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone how she had treated me, how she had tried to break me. But my lawyer advised patience. He said the truth, supported by evidence, would speak louder than emotions. And it did. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth came out. Bank records showed the insurance policy in my name. Property documents confirmed the house belonged to Imran. Messages and witnesses supported my claims of harassment. Even neighbors testified about hearing shouting matches and seeing me locked out with my child. With every hearing, I could see my mother-in-law's confidence crack. The woman who once ordered me to pack my bags now sat quietly, her jaw clenched, realizing she was losing control. The turning point came when the missing documents were brought up. Under pressure, she claimed she had found them accidentally while cleaning and returned them through her lawyer. That lie didn't sit well with the judge. It was clear what she had tried to do. When the judge warned her about the seriousness of tampering with legal documents, I felt something inside me finally release. For the first time, someone in authority saw through her manipulation. The final decision came on a day I will never forget. The court ruled that I had full legal custody of my daughter. It confirmed my right to the insurance money and recognized my right to the marital home. But by then, something inside me had shifted. Standing there, listening to the verdict, I realized I didn't want to go back to that house. Not after everything that had happened. That place held too much pain, too many memories of being silenced and threatened. I didn't want my daughter growing up in an environment filled with bitterness and resentment. So I made a choice that shocked everyone. I decided to take a financial settlement instead of returning to the house. The insurance money, combined with my share of the property's value, gave me enough to start fresh. My mother-in-law was furious to her. The house was about pride and control, not memories. Losing it felt like losing her last connection to power. But there was nothing she could do. The law was clear, and for once it was on my side. The aftermath was quiet in a way that felt almost eerie. The phone calls stopped. The accusations faded. Relatives who once criticized me suddenly became polite, even apologetic. Some admitted they hadn't known the full story. Others stayed silent, unwilling to confront their own role in enabling the abuse. I moved into a small apartment with my daughter. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Every corner of that space felt like freedom. I could breathe there. I could laugh without fear. I could grieve my husband without being told to disappear. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, overwhelmed by loneliness and the weight of responsibility. There were moments when I wished Imran were still alive, when I longed for the life we were supposed to have. But there was also strength I didn't know I possessed. I found work again. I rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. And my daughter grew, surrounded by love instead of hostility. Looking back, the woman who stood in that kitchen being told to pack her bags feels like a different person now. She was broken, terrified, and convinced she had no power. What I learned through this ordeal is something I wish more women were told. Grief does not erase your rights, and marriage does not make you disposable. Standing up for yourself will cost you comfort, peace, and sometimes relationships. But it can also give you something far more valuable: your dignity. And before I wrap this up in the final part, I want you to think about this one last time. If you were given the chance to reclaim what was legally yours, but knew returning would reopen old wounds, would you choose justice or freedom? Because, in the end, the decision I made wasn't just about winning a case. It was about choosing the kind of life I wanted to live from that moment forward. When everything finally settled, when the court files were closed and the noise around my name faded, I expected to feel victorious. I thought there would be some dramatic sense of triumph, like in the movies, where the woman walks away stronger and smiling. But the truth was much quieter than that. What I felt was a deep, heavy calm, mixed with sadness, relief, and a kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving something that almost destroyed you. I had won legally, yes, but emotionally, the journey had changed me forever. I was no longer the same woman who entered that house as a hopeful bride, believing love alone was enough to protect her. In the months that followed, I slowly built a new routine. Mornings were just me and my daughter, sunlight coming through the window of our small apartment, her laughter filling a space that once echoed with tension. I learned how to manage finances, something I had never done before. I learned how to make decisions without asking permission or fearing backlash. Every small achievement felt monumental. Paying bills on time, enrolling my daughter in school, decorating our home exactly the way I wanted. Each act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been taken away over the years. Occasionally, news about my mother-in-law would reach me through distant relatives. They said she was bitter, that she complained about being abandoned, that she told people I had ruined her life. At first, those stories hurt. I questioned myself, wondering if I had been too harsh, too firm. But then I would remember the nights I cried silently, the threats, the attempt to take my child away, and the doubt would fade. I realized something important. People who benefit from your silence will always call you cruel when you finally speak up. There were moments of guilt too, moments when I wondered if I could have handled things differently, more gently. But then I would look at my daughter, confident, secure, and loved, and I knew I had made the right choice. She grew up watching her mother stand up for herself, not with anger or revenge, but with courage and persistence. That to me was worth more than any property or money. Grief never truly leaves you. Even years later, there are days when Imran's absence feels unbearable. I still imagine what life would have been like if he were here, how different everything might have been. But I also believe that somewhere, somehow, he would be proud of me, proud that I protected our child, proud that I didn't let myself be erased. That thought gives me peace on the hardest days. What this experience taught me is something I wish every woman knew before she ever needed to learn it the hard way. Your worth does not end with your husband's life. Your place in this world is not dependent on someone else's approval. And standing up for yourself doesn't make you heartless or selfish. It makes you human. I didn't destroy a family. I saved myself and my child from being destroyed. So when I think back to the words that started it all, now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back, I no longer hear them with pain. I hear them as the moment my real journey began. The moment I chose not to disappear. The moment I chose myself. Now I want to hear from you. Was I wrong for fighting back? Or would you have done the same in my place? Like this video if you were on my side. Subscribe for more real, emotional stories like this. And share your thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Your support means more than you know, and your stories remind others they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.